I should like to talk to you briefly about civil rights and human freedom. It is my deep conviction that we have reached a turning point in the long history of our country's efforts to guarantee freedom and equality to all our citizens. Our immediate task is to remove the last remnants of the barriers which stand between millions of our citizens and their birthright. We must make the federal government a friendly, vigilant defender of the rights and equalities of all Americans. When I say all Americans, I mean all Americans. We can no longer afford the luxury of a leisurely attack upon prejudice and discrimination. Never before has the need been so urgent for skillful and vigorous action to bring us closer to our ideal.
I guess I'm introducing our panel one at a time. This is a smooth, carefully operating machine. Brigadier General Donald Scott. Colonel Edna Cummings. Chief Joanne Bass. And Colonel Aries Menser. Two from the Army, two from the Air Force, none from the Navy. We're too far from the water. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. By way of a little background, this is the latest in a series of outstanding public programs, both here in Kansas City and in Washington, D.C., presented by the Truman Library Institute over the past several years, exploring the civil rights legacy and leadership of Harry S. Truman, as you saw in the video. We began by commemorating President Truman's 1946 order, creating a Committee on Civil Rights, which in 1947 issued a landmark report calling for, among other things, the creation of a Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice to enforce the 14th Amendment, among other laws of the land. Truman promoted the committee's work during a historic address to the NAACP in 1947, making him the first president of the United States to address that preeminent civil rights organization. He introduced a legislative agenda to enact the recommendations of the committee with a speech to the joint session of Congress in early 1948, which you heard excerpted. This leadership came with great risks. A backlash across the South split the Democratic Party and seemed to destroy Truman's hopes of being elected president in 1948, and yet he pushed ahead. In June 1948, he issued Executive Orders 9980 and 9981, ending segregation in the United States Armed Forces and the federal workforce. At TrumanLibraryInstitute.org, you can find a whole trove of material from the Institute's three-day Civil Rights Symposium in Washington, D.C., which marked the 75th anniversary of those important actions. Tonight, we're gathered to discuss the consequences of Executive Order 9981, opening the U.S. military to all Americans equally. President Truman appointed a distinguished committee chaired by the former Solicitor General of the United States, Charles Fahey, to plan for the effective implementation of the desegregation order. On May 22nd, 1950, 75 years ago today, the Fahey Committee published its recommendations in a report titled Freedom to Serve. Our distinguished panelists have demonstrated through their remarkable careers, not just the justice embodied in President Truman's action and in the Fahey Committee's recommendations, but the wisdom of welcoming more of America's human resources into the nation's service. We can never have too many contributors, too much talent, too much sacrifice, or too much teamwork. These women and men are the proof of that truth. Now, we could spend the whole available time just detailing those careers, but instead I'm going to give only some thumbnail introductions so you'll know the caliber of human beings you're listening to. Brigadier General Donald Scott of the United States Army served in uniform for 30 years in a distinguished career that included 2 tours in Vietnam. His retirement has been, I use that term kind of euphemistically, has been equally distinguished and includes serving as the first director of AmeriCorps, the National Civilian Community Corps, after its creation in 1993, and for 10 years as Chief Operating Officer and Deputy Librarian of Congress. He's the author of Recipient of Grace, and there's copies available to purchase and to have him sign after we're done here. Colonel Edna Cummings, also of the United States Army, is a native of Fayetteville, North Carolina, and now operates a Washington, D.C. area consultancy, specializing in management and proposal services for federal and commercial clients. She was the first African-American woman to earn a commission as an Army officer through the Army ROTC program at Appalachian State University. That led to a distinguished 25-year military career in assignments ranging from appointments at Georgetown University and the Pentagon to NORAD and U.S. Northcom in Colorado Springs, Colorado. She's the author of A Soldier's Life, A Black Woman's Rise from Army Brat to 688 Champion. And I will let you know. Yeah. We've got copies of that as well. So we're sending you home with some books. Colonel, let's do Chief Bass next. I have this, as exciting as it is to meet generals and colonels, I love meeting Chief Master Sergeants.
The people who do the work, right?
Chief Bass is the first woman in the history of the United States Air Force to reach the office, the rank of Chief Master Sergeant. That is yes, this is of the Air Force. I should have said that. So that is the highest ranking enlisted member of the entire United States Air Force. She's here with us now. Colonel Menser is served almost 3 decades in active duty, also in the Air Force, in a rising, series of responsibilities from the Middle East to the Pentagon, where she served, among other roles, as legislative liaison for the United States Air Force. And we're going to tap a little bit of that expertise, I hope, before this conversation ends. So, as I say, I could go on and on, but instead, let's have a conversation. I started off talking about Harry Truman and his leadership on civil rights in this area, but I always feel it's very important to emphasize that this was not something given, but something, a justice that could no longer be denied by the time World War II had ended. African Americans, women, and people of other minorities served in every war that the United States has ever fought, going back to the Revolution. Indeed, first battle of the First War for American freedom, called the Boston Massacre. One of the Americans who lost his life there was Crispus Attucks, an African American man. There has never been a time when our military was not diverse, but it wasn't always inclusive. And that's the milestone that was passed. And I wonder, Colonel Cummings, if you would talk in that vein about the 6888, which was an incredibly diverse unit serving in World War II, not just women, but mostly African American. And you've made it your cause since retiring to bring that unit the attention it deserves.
Well, thank you for sharing that information. First of all, the 6888 was a part of a larger organization, the Women's Army Corps. And during World War II, there were almost 7,000 black women on active duty, to include nurses, in the U.S. and overseas. And the 6888, 855 black women, they were not all African American, they were from the diaspora. From Puerto Rico, some women didn't know they were black until they joined the 6888. True story. And during that time, the Army, the military, had a male morale crisis. Male wasn't getting through. So how many veterans do we have in the audience? Awesome. So regardless of your branch of service, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, now Space Force, when you deploy, the Army is in charge of your mail. So during World War II, as a result of D-Day preparations and the aftermath, there was a backlog, 2 to 3 year backlog of mail for a lot of reasons. Logistical reasons, and the mail just kept coming. 2 to 3 years backlog, some estimates, 21, 30 million pieces of mail and packages. Other units had tried and failed to resolve this issue. White men, civilians, white women, no one can get the job done. So as a result of the efforts of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, they became advocates. And by the way, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune was also General Mary McLeod Bethune. She was an honorary general in the Women's Army for National Defense, little side note. But their efforts allowed the women to go overseas on a meaningful mission. These women had no background in postal operations. They were not postal clerks. But 85% were either college graduates or high school teachers or former school teachers. So they were the best and brightest in the nation because the literacy levels during World War II were horrible. Fast forward, they got the job done. Birmingham, England was the area in Europe where the mail was held up in that area. And so the 6888 devised a system to clear the mail backlog in record time just in Birmingham, England. And then they went on to Rouen and Paris, France. So that's the legacy of the 6888. These were soldiers who were black women in the Women's Army Corps who saw the military's male morale crisis in the European theater of operations during World War II.
And if I could just add a note, the son of one of the 688 is here with us, with his wife, Santa Perry.
Is that right?
Sons,
Two of them, I'm sorry.
also a veteran, Vietnam-era veteran.
And if I could add a note real quick, Edna's being humble, but she is the woman that persisted for almost a decade to get what happened last month, which was the 688 finally getting the Congressional Gold Medal. She made that happen.
And yet, General Scott, you, if I remember your story correctly, when you first, you were around to hear the news of the signing of the executive order. And it changed the opportunities that you were able to imagine for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But yeah, first, let me just thank all of you all for coming out, and especially those that I've had the good fortune to meet within the last couple of years. And especially I want to highlight Lincoln University, which is a place that I graduated, because we have some in the audience, and many may not know that Lincoln is the only historical black college that was founded by former slaves who served in the Civil War, and is still going as a historical black college. So I wanted to thank everybody for being here. Now, to get back to, was I present when Lincoln crossed the...
I think I said Washington, across the Delaware.
Yeah, okay. No, no, I was 10 years old in 1948 in a little place called Honeywell, Missouri, when when Truman, when Truman signed Executive Order 9981. Now, in all honesty and fairness, that was during the time of separate but unequal. Yeah. And at 10 years old, we were called Negroes, and I was being bused 30-some miles round trip just to go to an all-black school. And so that order had zero impact on African Americans who were not in the military. However, and I didn't know this at the time, but in 1954, when the Supreme Court integrated the public school system, as I say, I didn't know it at the time, but the justices referred back to the order of Truman's to figure out that separate but equal, was completely wrong. And so that did have, the integration of public schools did have a tremendous impact, on me and every African American in Missouri and the South. So fast forward, I still don't know too much about 9981. So I go to Lincoln University as a freshman, and I'm wearing you had to sign up for OTC. My mom was deathly serious about me not going to the military because my brother had been in Korea, and she was worried that he wasn't going to come home and blah, blah, blah. So the first opportunity I get to come back home, I'm wearing my ROTC uniform. and I thought my mom was going to lose it. So I explained to her what was going on, that, you know, if I stayed, I could go in as a second lieutenant, and she called my brother, who had been a sergeant, asked him about what's this lieutenant thing. He said, don't worry, sergeants will make sure he don't hurt himself. So moving, you know, faster, and I'm not going to go through the 30 years that I served, because there were a lot of challenges, and most of them were based on race. But the one thing that I do remember is that the first indication that I had that the Army was integrated was when I reported to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is not too far from here. And all of the basic trainees coming in, many of them were from the South and had never coexisted on an equal basis with African Americans, and vice versa. And shocks be what it is, now they've got a black lieutenant who's telling them when to go to bed, when to get up. And that was my first indication that this thing was real. The second indication that I had about being in the Army was there were no senior officers, black officers. There were no black generals, only a few black colonels, though the armies did have the policy of treating everybody equal and did have the policy of fair treatment. And even though I didn't know the history of Truman signing that order, I did know, and I agreed wholeheartedly with the policy of equality and treatment. And every time something came up that affected me or my family or African Americans, I was quick to talk about it. Now, there were no senior officers to help me out, and I didn't run across a senior officer, a senior black officer. I went in 1960. It was 1977 before I met a full bird colonel, Howard University graduate,
Wow.
getting ready to assume a major command at Fort Lewis, Washington. On top of that, he liked me, and he stopped by my house purposefully to see who I was. Come to find out, he and I belonged to the same fraternity. Now, he stayed in contact with me because he really took an interest. He made Lieutenant General. I made Brigadier General. A lot to do with him making sure that the doors were open for me. So when I retired in 1991 as a Brigadier General, the one thing that I carried with me into civilian life was a respect for the policy of equality and treatment. And so when I got the job at the city of Atlanta, Georgia, as the Chief Operating Officer, that was my goal. When I got the job starting AmeriCorps' National Civilian and Community Corps, that was my policy. And when I became the first Chief Operating Officer for the Library of Congress, I did that for 10 years, that was my policy. Now, the one thing that I do want to say before I relinquish the mic
Oh, you're better than that.
is I wound up being asked to serve on the Truman board, and I've been on the board for 5 years. And it has truly been a blessing, and the blessing has been to learn how come I had all these problems and who was trying to fix them. And the one thing that I have learned that I want to share with everybody in the sound of my voice is President Harry Truman made America the global leader for the last 75 years. And I'm not blowing smoke at you. His policies, and there are 3 of them that come to mind. His policies are what made America great. And the first policy that he enacted was to integrate the federal government and to integrate the armed services. The second policy that made America great was to rebuild Germany and to rebuild Japan. No conquering country had ever rebuilt their enemy. And the third policy that he did was champion NATO, and then to throw in the World Bank. So for 75 years, America has been the global leader of the world. And it's President Harry Truman, who did that. And I would encourage all of us to go back and remember that the policy of inclusion, equity in treatment is the policy that's not only good for individuals, but it's good for the world. And right now we are in danger. Thank you.
And David, if I could. David, I just want to highlight real quick, and for everyone, please read General Scott's book. I've read it, it's phenomenal. And what you will read in there is that he succeeded. When he entered the Army, there were no black generals, not one, and he broke that barrier, right? He was able to rise as a general in the Army in a situation where it didn't exist before him. But when you read his book, what you're going to read is repeated stories of excellence, of him serving above the standard, and him teaching the institution who didn't know how to integrate a black officer during his career. At every opportunity, he taught the institution how to treat him and how to open the doors for those coming behind him. So please give this man a round of applause, because he made so much of our freedoms possible.
That's so beautifully said. It was harder, not easier for you. Yet somehow, and Chief Batts, I'm hoping you'll talk about this because you've just recently been at the Pentagon. You've got the very fresh eyes on what's going on right now. Somehow, this phenomenal story of opening up our society, making the most of these incredible human resources, and allowing people to serve the country has been turned into something wrong. What have you seen? How has that happened, and what sort of impact is it having?
Thanks for that softball. First, I just want to say I'm super excited to be here, largely in part because while I'm Air Force, I'm married to an Army guy who happens to be from Kansas. And so I made a great decision in that, but we're also big Chiefs fans, so super excited to be here. So thanks for being here, and it's always great to spend time with our veteran community, and for everybody in here who are allies of the military, thanks. I will say, it's interesting times right now, and I've been mentally taking note of, General Scott, some of the things you said as well. David, is what you said when you keep talking about, kind of human resource, right, if you will. I look at today's service member as our most prized weapon system. Like, you can have all the F-35s, drones, tanks, armored vehicles, whatever it might be, satellites now. None of that matters if we don't have the best talent in the United States military, period. And so, yes, I saw but the amen section right here was about to do something. But I think that's important to note, and you just said, President Truman made some very very wise decisions that have impacted us for the last 75 years. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I think it's important because I can't help but think about for the last several years what's been on my mind as we lead through these very challenging times. And when I talk to our service members, what I would share with them is one of my favorite books, by the way, which is What Got You Here Won't Get You There, if you've ever read it before. It's a leadership book. But what I share with our Air Force in particular is while we've been the strongest Air Force in the world, what got us here will not get us there. For the last 30 plus years, in fact, we have had the world stage. There's no stronger military, and oh, by the way, we have to have our allies and partners in this, but no stronger military. If you look at the United States military over the last 30 years, we're largely in part the smallest we've ever been, right? But we've been the greatest military because of the diversity of the force, and that has truly been our strength. But for the last 30 years, other nations who might not otherwise like America has been moving out fast, and they've been closing the gap that we have had for so long. And again, not trying to get depressing, but that strength and dominance that we have relied on as Americans is not assured in 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years. And so the strength of the military has to be our focus. Certainly to the veterans who are in this room, we take that serious, but we have to remind folks that this is not just my military or my Air Force, this is your military. And so it really is upon all of us to focus and make sure that your military, your Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, so glad we have a Space Force, because if we lose in space, we lose, period. But we have to capture the talent from across the nation. And that is why diversity absolutely matters. And oh, by the way, don't let media fool you. Your military is merit-based and has always been merit-based. And so the ability to celebrate the diverse force that we have should be a good thing. I was the first female Chief Master Sergeant of the entire Air Force, and really the first most senior female in any branch of service. It took 72 years. 72 years to be the first. And oh, by the way, that's not an amen yet, because what really has to happen is we have seconds and thirds and fourths, and we quit counting. That's where we have to be, where we can again get to that point. So from a Pentagon, I forgot what you asked, David, but from a Pentagon standpoint, I will say that there is some concern on my end with how media, how things are being spun, where today's service members are concerned to say the word diversity. Like that, we don't just shut off the things that matter again, and I think you need more people to speak truth, which is your military is merit-based. We believe in opportunities. We believe in, and by the way, speaking of opportunities, I met a couple Air Force, where's all the Air Force veterans in here, by the way? We're always outnumbered. We're always outnumbered by the Army and the Marine Corps. But I met an Air Force couple there who we talk about opportunities. They told me, hey, Chief, we came in the Air Force the same year you did as two young enlisted folks. They retired as officers serving here in the Kansas Air National Guard. Yes, so opportunities all around us. That is what we have to provide.
Thank
you. There is a narrative. I won't point to any particular Secretary of Defense at this moment, but he seems to use the word warrior as an opposite or antithesis to, for example, woman. There are warriors and there are women. I'm thinking that y'all might reject that concept.
Well, first of all, one thing that does not discriminate on the battlefield, and that's bullets. Bullets don't care what color you are. And guess what? When the bullet hits you, the only color that comes out is red. So that's the only color we don't want to see on the battlefield. And tapping into talent is a gift. And General, I was listening to you. My father turns 98 this year. He actually enlisted in 1947. So he remembers coming back to the U.S. when German prisoners could sit in certain sections on trains, and he had to sit in the back, and he didn't like it then, and here, he still occasionally talks about it. So you make these sacrifices, but yet and still you are treated less than. So, and it's amazing that benign characteristics, if it's truly merit-based, I heard this author who wrote a book, she was in the Marines, she says, a 12-mile hike is a 12-mile hike. It doesn't matter what you got going on beneath the waistline. I mean, that's a true statement. Men, women, you got to do 12 miles. That's the standard. Yeah. She was a Marine, by the way. Army, we stop around 5, but Air Force, maybe, 2? But regardless, you still have to meet the standard. And so I just think it's poor talent management. And Chief, to your point, we've always been merit-based, and you just have to wonder, what is it about being a diverse group that makes people so uncomfortable? What is it? That means that something in that diverse group is so powerful until it's unnerving. Because in order for you to become the first, and all of us probably have been the first at some point, we know the journey was twice as hard. And I was a logistician when I started out, and I would tell people I have to know what time it is, how to build a clock, where the parts came from, the order shipping time for those parts, and the name of the line item manager. So we have to be so thorough because I've lived, first of all, I don't think I've ever got a job because I've been qualified. Truly. I never had a job because when I walk in the door, it was like, okay, we got one. Okay, so what did I have to do? I had to work twice as hard, be twice as thorough because, and maybe it was self-imposed, and it's until recently I just feel like, okay, I'm here because I know I've worked twice as hard to be here. So being that first, it's okay because your road was harder. My road was harder. We had to be twice as good for half the respect. And that's something that people fail to recognize. So stepping back to the 6888, you had these black women who were portrayed so many times, before they went into the Army, that they didn't have options. They had education, but lack of opportunity. During World War II, the literacy levels were less than 40%. 20 million draftees couldn't make the cut. So you had black women, first of all, and women in general had to have high school diplomas. The men did not. In general, I like to add that something else Truman did was Public Law 625, the Women's Service Integration Act, that allowed women to become permanent parts of the military post-World War II. So you had 4, I'm gonna add number 5. Okay. So had it not been for Truman taking that bold step to allow women to come back on active duty during World War II, we wouldn't have had the greatest generation and the descendants, because a lot of women from World War II made the military a career and retired. So that being said, diversity is such a strength, and now it's become a 4-letter word. And my basic point is, bullets, artillery, they don't care, and neither should we. We should care about the talent. So.
Hey, can I?
Okay. Yeah. Since we're going to have some church in here.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the executive order that really made it possible for Truman to integrate the military. And that was Executive Order 9808, in which he formed the Presidential Civil Rights Commission. And we have to bear in mind that this was in 1946. And in 1946, now, I was 6 years old then. Don't remember that, but I do remember my neighbors in that small community of 400 people, and there's only 30 black people that lived in Honeywell. And though we got along well, the attitude of most of the whites were that we were different, because we had our own church, we had our own little schools, everything. So everything was different. Now, the reason I'm going to emphasize this is Harry Truman grew up with that same belief. And here it is in 1946. He just had been president for a little while. And you got all of these civil rights groups who have joined together in order to get the president's attention about the returning black soldiers who were being shot, maimed, killed. And they formed what they called the National Emergency Committee Against Mob Violence. And they had this big meeting with President Truman in the White House and was complaining about Isaac Woodard, who had his eyes ground out because he was on a bus and asked the bus driver if he could stop to go relieve himself, because otherwise when they stopped they wouldn't let African Americans use the public facilities.
He was a veteran.
Yeah, he was a veteran
in uniform. And was dragged off the bus and beaten.
And so when this group of African Americans was telling this to the president, it's reported that he says, you know, people come to me with all their problems and they think I can just wave a magic wand and solve everybody's problems. And the one person in the room who had really good relationship with President Truman was Walter White, who was the NAACP person. Walter had the courage in that moment, in that setting, to say, Mr. President, I don't think you really understand what's going on. So he told the graphic detail about grinding out this guy's eyes. And it is reported that President Truman says, my God, I did not know that that was happening. We have got to do something. Now, what I take from that story is that, and I've been in positions in which, you know, you are the big gun, and everybody's coming to you thinking that you can solve everybody's problems, and somebody tells you such a human story that all of a sudden you forget you white or black, and you resonate. Truman resonated. And I would say to you that had Truman not appointed that integrated commission, we would not have had integration anywhere. Because that commission he appointed as his Civil Rights Commission, 16 members. Many say that it was like a Noah's Ark. So it had two of everything. That there were two African Americans, two women, two college presidents, three clergy, and it also had two executives, two to examine all that had been taking place against the black soldiers, all that had been taking place. And Truman had the good fortune, though, had the good sense not to make it about race. He made it about equal rights to everybody. And when Truman said everybody, he says that means everybody. Here's the bottom line. Now, except you. We've been minority all of our lives. And adjusting, having to adjust in order to fit in. And so we've gotten pretty good at it. Those who have not had to do that are not good at it at all. And so one of the takeaways I would hope that we would get from listening about Harry Truman is his courage to say, I've got to start listening and talking and learning about people who don't look like me. I said it. Okay.
If I could add, go ahead.
Yeah.
You know, so Sergeant Isaac Woodard, you just heard his story, that really was a catalyst for President Truman opening his eyes and opening his perspective and recognizing that the America that he knew was not the experience for all Americans. And then as we talk about this 75th anniversary, it's since Isaac Woodard, you know, just this last year, we had a Air Force airman Senior Airman Roger Fortson, who wanted to serve his country. He was in special operations just like Chief Bass and myself, and a presumption of guilt and a narrative of inferiority about him ended his service. He was killed. He was willing to die for our country, right? For each and every one of us. And he died because of what he looked like, a presumption of guilt and a narrative of inferiority, a judgment made about him before they even knew him. We talk about the 75th anniversary, and we look back and say, what happened to get us to the executive order? What happened to get us to the freedom to serve? What happened to get us to the Women's Armed Service Integration Act? So important, and I'm so grateful for President Truman, as well as the Truman Library Institute, who arranged this forum tonight and allowed us to have this critical conversation. But I want you to also walk away understanding that it wasn't just 75 years ago. It is still happening today. It's still happening today. And I also want you to know that, you know, the 6888, when our nation was in a crisis, we opened the doors for everybody to serve. We waited until we got to that crisis point to say, well, all these other people could not figure out how to sort that mail and get that raise the morale for the folks that were on the home front and the folks that were on the front lines. So we're going to open the aperture and allow somebody different to come in and try something new. We should not wait for the next crisis to decide that everybody gets a chance to have the freedom to serve.
Well said.
So if I can add, while it's still happening today, and while our military is certainly not perfect, I'm so proud of the United States military in leading the charge on almost all things as it relates to fairness and creating opportunities and leading the charge, because I think that's important. You know, when Colonel Metzer talks about Roger Fortson, it reminded me of a time a few years back when the racial tensions were even higher right after the killing of George Floyd, and I had a discussion with a lot of our service members. And I was very candid in my questioning with our service members, and we lived in Mississippi at the time. And I asked them, I said, how many of you all feel safe? Just a question. And the minority airmen said, Chief, we only feel safe outside of our gate when we are in uniform. So the uniform of the military, to some degree, provided them a safe haven. They said, but Chief, when we take off the uniform, we do not feel safe here in Mississippi. So it gets back to that curiosity piece, General, that you're talking about. But again, I have to say this, I am so proud of the United States military and always leading the charge. And one thing, Colonel, when you were talking about, bullets, et cetera, what I would offer, again, to this group, the character of war has changed. It is 2025, and as we look into the future, it is not good enough that your military is simply good in air, land, and sea. We have to be good in those domains, but we better be good in air, land, sea, space, cyber, and information. And if we lose in those last three, space, cyber, or information, we can't even generate air power. We can't generate sea power. And so that is why it's critical when you talk about the warrior, what kind of warriors we have. Well, I need some cyber warriors. And I need some warriors who understand about space operations. And they are not going to look the same, but nonetheless, we have to have the best talent.
And we need to empower our command teams with the tools to be able to integrate people from all different sectors of America. Somebody coming out of Mississippi is not going to be the same as somebody coming out of inner city Detroit, right? And so to be able to unite those forces, to be able to accomplish the mission, we've got to find a way to bring them together. And some of the programs that are now being eroded, those were some of the tools that command teams had to unify their formations. And so we need to bring those back so that just like when we send us forward to different countries around the world and we do that training, we need that same training internally because America is not all the same, right? There are so many different backgrounds and so many different cultures within America, and your command teams want to bring them together, and those tools that we're stripping away were the tools they had to do that.
Beautifully said. And Colonel Menser, you have had a lot of experience persuading people in power in Washington, carrying messages, the Air Force message to Capitol Hill and elsewhere. What can we and the services be doing more effectively now to carry this message, to have those kinds of transformative events for people that President Truman had, where they suddenly get it? You all are speaking so powerfully to this subject. How can we amplify and make that message more effective?
I'd start off with every airman, sailor, soldier, Marine, Guardian has a story, right? And often, is when we were in uniform and walked throughout our communities, the different places where we've served, we were often told, thank you for your service, which we appreciate because all of you are worthy of it. When you see a service member, get to know their story. Find out who they are. Find out if they have the freedom to serve in the communities where we are sending them across our nation, overseas. And if not, do something, right? Help find out what is happening with them, and then you do your part, right, to make sure that they have those foundations of success to build off of. They have a welcoming community. They feel safe where they serve. They're able to show up every day and rise to their best because the communities that are around each and every one of our military bases and posts are welcoming for your airmen, your sailors, your soldiers, your Marines, your Guardians, all of us. I think that's where we start. And then for the leaders that are out there, what I would say is listen. Understand what's happening within your formations and in your communities. Spend time connecting with those internally, and then do what you can do at your level to affect change. Change doesn't come if we wait for some other person or some other time. You've got so many examples throughout history of people that just rose to the occasion. We are the change we've been waiting for. So I ask that for all of those that are out there, here in the audience tonight, everybody online, thank you for joining online. You know, you be the change that you seek. You know, each and every one of these leaders that are sitting up here on the stage, you know, they're up here on the stage tonight because they had the courage to challenge the status quo, to question something when it didn't seem like it was right, legal, or moral, right? And then they did the right thing. And that's what we're asking everybody to do. Wherever you are, whatever your resources are, whatever your capabilities are, do what you can do to help perfect our democracy and help us rise to our constitutional ideas.
And I want to speak now as a citizen of the United States of America. And the lesson that I take away about citizenship is when President Truman assumed the presidency, America was the only country in the world that had the atomic bomb. And that allowed America to technologically get so far in advance of other countries that we were the people that everybody wanted to emulate. And so the average citizen didn't know diddly squat about the atoms, and other than it just killed a lot of people. So here's where I'm going with this. The chief has talked about cyberspace and other avenues of power now. And as a citizen, we don't really understand, most of us don't understand, about this artificial intelligence. Nor do we understand what our government is doing to either garner that resource and or collaborate with us. And so, you know, I intend to contact my representatives and ask them about artificial intelligence. Where are we with respect to China? Where are we with respect to Russia? Because I fear that there's something going on that we, the American people, don't know about. The most recent trip that was made to the Middle East, I know involved artificial intelligence. And from what I've been able to understand is the Saudis and the Middle Easterners want to become the center for artificial intelligence. That has a whole lot of implications. And so it's not enough just to have, you know, the best airplanes, best tanks, as the chief said. We as citizens it's still our country. And by God, we just have to act like it by calling up the people that supposed to represent us and make them either represent us or we get somebody else.
Well, freedom to serve, everyone should have the opportunity. The military isn't for everyone. Everyone isn't qualified. So the question says, well, what can we do? You cannot change the world, only your part of the world. We talk about Isaac Woodard being beaten. There were black women in World War II who were beaten and in prison and spat on, who fought for the right to serve. So it just wasn't the men. There is a court case at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, about 4 women who were court-martialed for refusing to perform menial tasks. So it's not talked about what women had to undergo to have the right to serve. So that applies across the board. And there are so many dynamics, and I heard this one chief of naval operations once said, ducks like ducks. We like what's comfortable. We like what we get, accustomed to, regardless of what it is. And we see someone who looks different, with a different dialect, different part of, the world, different part of the country. And so there's a hesitancy. But sometimes that's where the talent is. So sometimes we all have to step outside of our comfort zones, only for a minute, but that is how we learn. That is how we learn, just by, now it's guarded, because everyone who is pleasant may not be the person you want to talk to. However, but just give people a chance, especially in the workplace. I think that's where it starts. And Aries, to your point, with the military, how people from throughout the U.S. and different parts of the world are forced to come together. And this has been going on since the military was formed. They have to make it work. They have to make it work. Because at the end of the day, that team moving forward on the battlefield now with the dimensions, air, space, land, you name it, no one cares as long as you get the job done at the end of the day. And I cannot tell you on a personal level, and that's another reason I wrote the book, how many white males have apologized to me. That's why I said early on that, and that's why I relate to Cherry Adams' story so much. I walk into a room, I'm never there because I'm qualified. And so, yeah, I did have to do a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I got, some apologies. You're a really damn good officer. So my response, so it wasn't my imagination. No, we just thought you were some token we had to deal with. All of y'all came in here at the same time. I mean, they were just very candid, which I appreciate. And some of these individuals now, they're still, we have mended, the differences, and we could move forward. So that's what it takes sometimes. You have to break down those artificial barriers, and it's between our ears most of the time, and it's not based on fact, because at the end of the day, all of us on this stage for a reason. And we all came from different backgrounds, but how are we able to communicate? Where are you from, Aries? Yeah, you were born in some weird...
Born in Maine.
Yeah, she was born in Maine. Who can have a conversation?
Anybody from Maine tonight?
She was born in Maine. And so, in the military, normally the people from the South get together in the North, and sometimes it's not race-based. Sometimes it's regional, and that's my point. Nothing against people from Maine.
They're wonderful.
Yeah, but that's just the point. It starts. You cannot change the world, but just do your part. Incremental gains, a little at a time, and don't try to do it all at once, because it is hard, having conversations with people from different parts of the world and United States.
And just imagine what our armed forces would be if people didn't spend so much time proving that they were worthy of the opportunities they were in.
Right.
If they just got to show up and do their duty, as opposed to have to prove that they earned that opportunity, that they were capable of the mission, that they would execute as ordered, just imagine where we could be right now. There still are a lot of people who are fighting for the right to fight. They have the patriotism because that knows no race, no gender, no sexual orientation, right? Patriotism is not bounded. And they have the desire to serve, but yet they have to fight for these opportunities. And, imagine what Edna could have contributed. She's done a lot. Chief Bass has done a lot, right? These women, what they could have contributed if they weren't trying to teach and prove to everybody else that they deserve to be in those positions.
Yeah. And it was more than proving. We have this thing, CYA, because I can tell you, not only when I was on active duty, but after it, every job I did, I felt like, okay, I'm going to get audited or brought up or some accusation. So you just have to be so thorough and looking over your shoulder, all right? So without those barriers, without those concerns, just imagine, and maybe it made me better, it probably did, because I have a tendency to check, and double check, and that's just the military. But without the extra concern, trying to prove that I belong to be here. So.
This, we could go on forever, but I feel like that's a good stopping place. Everybody's...
I think we should have a part 2 on national security one time. What do y'all think about that?
Yeah.
Then we can talk more about China.
Well, yeah, we've got, Truman reorganized the whole national security apparatus of the U.S., so we'll sign you all up, and that'll be part 2. I love that. Alex, make a note, another program idea. I get to moderate a number of panels. This one is really deeply special. What a remarkable group of panelists, and just such a great interplay. Thank you all for being here, for caring enough to come out. Those who are seeing us online, thank you for joining us for a really important conversation, not just historical, but of the moment. And thank you to the Truman Library Institute, all the staff here that make this possible, and to the Kansas City Public Library for allowing us, hosting us in this terrific space, the Truman Forum. So thank you, and good night.
All right.